Mom, I thought Vanessa was spending the weekend with you. Those were the words my son said to me at 11:47 on a quiet Thursday night, and I remember every detail because that was the exact moment our family began to fall apart. I was sitting alone in my kitchen in Scottsdale, Arizona, eating a frozen lasagna on a tray table while an old game show played softly in the background. The air conditioner hummed above me, fighting against the desert heat that still clung to the windows even after sunset. My reading glasses rested low on my nose, and I had just poured myself a second cup of chamomile tea when my phone lit up with Daniel's name. My son rarely called during flights. After 15 years as a commercial pilot, he followed schedules with almost military precision. If he was calling me at nearly midnight, something was wrong. Daniel. I answered quickly, already feeling my chest tighten. For a few seconds, I heard nothing except muffled airport noise in the background. Rolling luggage. Distant announcements. Then his voice came through low and strange, quieter than I'd ever heard it before. Mom, Vanessa is with you tonight, right? I frowned and looked around my silent kitchen as if somehow his wife might suddenly appear beside me. No, honey, I said slowly. I haven't seen Vanessa in almost 2 weeks. Silence. Long enough for me to pull the phone away and check if the call had dropped. Then I heard him exhale shakily. That's what I thought. My stomach turned cold. Daniel, what's going on? Another pause. I just landed in Denver. His voice sounded distant now, like he was speaking from somewhere very far away, even though I knew he was only a state away. I was doing the final walkthrough in business class before passengers deplaned. I could hear footsteps echoing around him. And I saw Vanessa. I sat up straighter in my chair. Saw her? Yeah. His laugh came out hollow. She was sitting in seat 4A. He stopped again. With another man. I gripped the edge of the tray table so hard my fingers hurt. Outside my kitchen window, the palm trees barely moved in the warm night air, but suddenly I felt freezing cold. Daniel, she told me she was staying with you because you weren't feeling well. His voice cracked slightly on the word well. She said you didn't want to be alone this weekend. I closed my eyes. 3 days earlier, Vanessa had texted me a simple message asking if I needed groceries dropped off. I told her no, thanked her anyway, and that was the end of the conversation. No visit. No overnight stay. Nothing. I don't understand, I whispered. Maybe there's some mistake. But even as I said it, something heavy settled deep in my chest. Because suddenly little things I had ignored for months began drifting back into my memory like pieces of paper floating to the surface of water. Vanessa stopping by unexpectedly just long enough to take a picture with me before leaving again. Vanessa mentioning girls' weekends I never fully understood. Vanessa always making sure other people heard her say things like, I'm going over to Evelyn's tonight. I pressed my fingers against my temple. Daniel, are you sure it was her? Mom. His voice softened painfully. I've been married to her for 11 years. I heard another announcement overhead, then the sound of a rolling suitcase stopping nearby. She didn't see me at first, he continued quietly. She was laughing. That word seemed to hurt him most of all. Laughing. The guy had his arm resting near her seat. She looked, he stopped himself. Comfortable. I stared down at the untouched tea in front of me. A thin layer of steam still curled from the mug. Did she see you eventually? Yeah. This time his laugh was bitter. Right before landing. Another silence stretched between us. I imagined my son standing alone inside some bright airport corridor in his Navy pilot uniform, while travelers hurried past him without a clue that his entire life had just shifted beneath his feet. What did she say? I finally asked. Nothing important. His voice became flat now, controlled in the way people sound when they're trying very hard not to fall apart. She looked shocked. The guy disappeared into the crowd almost immediately. He inhaled slowly. Vanessa kept insisting there was an explanation. I could hear exhaustion settling into him now, heavier than anger. But Mom, she was supposed to be with you. My eyes drifted toward the framed family photo sitting beside my refrigerator. It had been taken 4 years earlier during Thanksgiving. Daniel stood behind Vanessa with both hands resting on her shoulders while she smiled brightly at the camera. Back then I used to look at that picture and think my son had built the kind of marriage every mother hopes for her child. Stable, loving, safe. Now all I could think about was how easy it suddenly seemed to fake happiness. Daniel, I said softly, come home tomorrow. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, Almost like a child again, he asked, "Mom, have I been stupid?" The question broke something inside me, because no matter how old our children become, there are moments when they sound young again, vulnerable again. I swallowed hard and looked around my empty kitchen. One chair, one plate, one untouched cup of tea growing cold beneath the Arizona night. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "I think someone just got very good at lying." I barely slept after Daniel's call. The desert sky outside my bedroom window slowly faded from black to pale gray, and sometime around 5 in the morning, I gave up pretending rest was possible. I wrapped my old cream cardigan around my shoulders and walked downstairs barefoot, careful on the cold tile floors. My house felt painfully quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. The kind that presses against your chest. I started the coffee maker and stood at the kitchen counter waiting for the familiar smell to fill the room. Outside, the first sunlight was beginning to touch the tops of the palm trees lining my street. Scottsdale mornings were always beautiful in a dry, lonely sort of way. Even after 12 years living there, I still had not fully gotten used to how silent the desert could feel. My husband, Richard, used to love mornings like this. He would sit on the patio reading the newspaper while I watered the potted flowers he insisted we buy, even though Arizona heat killed half of them every summer. For a moment, I caught myself glancing toward the empty patio chair as if he might still be there. Then reality settled over me again. Richard had been gone for almost 6 years. Daniel lived mostly in airports now, and somewhere out there, my daughter-in-law had apparently built an entire second life while using my name as cover. I poured coffee into my favorite chipped blue mug and sat down at the kitchen table. My phone rested beside me. Silent. No messages from Vanessa. No explanation. Nothing. Around 7:30, I finally received a text from Daniel. "Landed in Phoenix. Need some sleep first. Can I come by later?" I stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. "Of course, sweetheart. I will make lunch." He sent back a small heart emoji. That almost made me cry. Daniel had never been overly emotional, even as a little boy. He was the kind of child who quietly carried pain instead of talking about it. When he was 10 years old and broke his arm falling off his bicycle, he apologized to the emergency room nurse for causing trouble before they even took him for x-rays. Some people are simply built to endure things silently, which is why I knew last night had shaken him deeply. I spent the morning trying to distract myself with ordinary tasks. I folded laundry, watered the plants, reorganized the spice cabinet even though it did not need reorganizing. But no matter what I did, my thoughts kept drifting backward. Tiny moments. Strange little details I had ignored because I trusted Vanessa completely. About 8 months earlier, she had shown up unexpectedly on a Saturday afternoon carrying iced coffees and pastries. "I just wanted to check on you," she had said warmly. "Daniel worries that you spend too much time alone." We sat together on the patio for maybe 20 minutes. She asked about my arthritis, complimented the flowers, took a selfie with me and posted it online with the caption, "Spending the weekend with Mom." But now that memory looked different. Because shortly after posting that picture, Vanessa suddenly claimed she needed to meet a friend downtown and left almost immediately. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Another memory surfaced. Last spring, she had asked if she could leave an overnight bag at my house because she was supposedly helping organize a church fundraiser nearby. The bag sat untouched in my guest room for 2 days before she picked it up again. I remember joking that she practically lived out of suitcases these days. She only smiled and changed the subject. Around 11, I found myself opening Facebook for the first time in weeks. Vanessa's page looked exactly as polished as always. Smiling photos, charity luncheons, date nights with Daniel, inspirational quotes about family and gratitude written in elegant script across pastel backgrounds. In one photo from 3 weeks earlier, she stood beside Daniel at some aviation charity gala wearing a dark green satin dress and resting her hand against his chest while he smiled proudly beside her in uniform. Hundreds of comments filled the post. Perfect couple. Marriage goals. Beautiful family. I stared at the picture until my eyes hurt because suddenly all I could see was performance. Every smile looked rehearsed now. Every caption carefully designed. It frightened me how easy it apparently was to build an illusion. Shortly after noon, the doorbell rang. My chest tightened instantly. For one terrible second, I thought it might be Vanessa. But when I opened the door, Daniel stood there alone. He looked exhausted. His Navy pilot uniform was wrinkled, and faint shadows sat beneath his blue eyes. He tried to smile when he saw me, but it barely reached his face. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. The moment I touched his arm, I realized how tense he was. Like every muscle in his body had been clenched for hours. I pulled him into a hug without saying anything. He held on to me a little longer than usual. When we finally stepped inside, he glanced around the quiet house before exhaling heavily. "Smells like Dad's coffee in here," he murmured. I nodded and led him toward the kitchen. I had made turkey sandwiches and potato salad, but once we sat down at the table, neither of us touched the food. Daniel just stared at his hands for a while. Then finally he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something carefully on the table between us. A boarding pass. Business class. Seat 4A. Vanessa Carter. Daniel stared at the boarding pass between us as though it physically hurt too. "Look at it." The small white rectangle sat on my kitchen table beside untouched sandwiches and 2 glasses of melting iced tea, and somehow that ordinary little piece of paper felt heavier than anything else in the room. "She booked the ticket herself," he said quietly after several moments. "Not through my airline benefits. Not through our shared account either." He rubbed his hands slowly across his face before leaning back in the chair. "That means she did not want me seeing the reservation." I watched him carefully. The exhaustion in his face reminded me painfully of Richard during the final months before cancer took him. That same hollow look people get when reality begins slipping out from under them. "Did she try calling you after last night?" I asked softly. Daniel gave a short nod. 8 times. His phone rested face down beside him on the table. I turned it off after I got home. Outside the kitchen window, sunlight flooded the backyard now. The fountain Richard installed years ago trickled steadily beside the patio, and somewhere down the street, I could hear a lawn mower starting up. Everything looked normal. That was the strange part about betrayal. The world never changed around it. The sky stayed blue. Neighbors still watered their lawns. Coffee still brewed. Meanwhile, an entire life quietly cracked open beneath the surface. Daniel finally picked up the boarding pass again. The man she was with checked in under the name Marcus Hale. He said the name carefully, like he had already repeated it to himself 100 times. I recognized him after a while. "You know him?" "Not personally." Daniel shook his head. "But I have seen him before." That made my stomach tighten immediately. "Before?" He nodded slowly. "A few months ago at a hotel bar in Dallas during a layover." He stared toward the window now instead of at me. "Vanessa told me she was visiting you that weekend too." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then suddenly another memory hit me, so clearly it almost made me dizzy. Last October. Vanessa arriving at my house carrying a small overnight bag and wearing cream-colored yoga clothes with oversized sunglasses perched on her head. She stayed. Barely 15 minutes before claiming she needed to run errands nearby. Later that evening, she texted me asking if I would mind telling Daniel she had fallen asleep early if he called because she had a headache. At the time, I actually thought she was being thoughtful by not wanting him to worry. My chest felt cold now remembering it. "Oh my God," I whispered before I could stop myself. Daniel looked up immediately. "What?" I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "I think she has been using me for longer than we realized." His jaw tightened slightly, but he stayed quiet while I explained about the overnight bag, the fake headaches, the short visits that never quite made sense. The more I spoke, the paler he became. "There is more," I admitted softly. "Sometimes she would ask me to send her pictures." Daniel frowned. "Pictures? Just harmless things." Shame crept into my voice now because I suddenly felt foolish. Coffee cups, movie nights, little things. His expression changed immediately. "She posted them online." It was not a question. I nodded slowly. I thought she was trying to include me. Daniel leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath through his nose. "No," he murmured bitterly. "She was building an alibi." The word hung heavily between us. Alibi. I looked around my kitchen, suddenly seeing everything differently. The framed photos. The little gifts Vanessa brought over. The handwritten birthday card signed "Love You, Mom." Had any of it been real? Or was I simply convenient? Daniel stood abruptly and walked toward the sink. For a moment, he just stood there staring out the window at the backyard. "I keep replaying it in my head," he admitted quietly. "Seeing her on that plane." His voice remained calm, but I could hear pain underneath every word now. "She looked relaxed, Mom. Happy." He swallowed hard. "Not nervous. Not guilty. Just comfortable." I did not know what to say to that, because there are some kinds of hurt no parent can protect their child from. When she finally noticed me, he continued softly. Her face changed instantly. It was like watching someone switch masks. He laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. And the worst part is, she still tried lying even after getting caught. He turned back toward me then. She told me Marcus was just a friend from some charity board. Do you believe that? I asked gently. Daniel looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. No, silence settled again. The clock above the stove ticked steadily while sunlight crept farther across the tile floor. Finally, Daniel walked back to the table and picked up his phone. I did something after I got home this morning, he said carefully. Something I probably should have done months ago. My stomach tightened. What? He unlocked the phone and opened a folder filled with screenshots. Hotel confirmations, flight records, restaurant charges, luxury lounges in cities Vanessa had supposedly never visited. He slid the phone toward me slowly. I started checking everything. I stared down at the screen while my hands slowly began trembling. Because suddenly the pattern was everywhere once you knew where to look. Daniel spent the next 3 hours at my kitchen table going through records with the same quiet precision he used during flights. That was what frightened me most. He was not emotional anymore. He was methodical, calm. The kind of calm that comes after something inside a person finally breaks. The turkey sandwiches sat untouched while afternoon sunlight slowly moved across the kitchen floor. Every now and then I would refill our iced tea glasses, but neither of us drank much. Daniel's laptop remained open between us beside stacks of printed flight schedules and credit card statements he had pulled from their shared accounts before Vanessa could change passwords. Look at this, he said quietly at one point, rotating the screen toward me. I adjusted my reading glasses and leaned closer. Hotel reservations. Dallas, Seattle, Miami, San Diego. Most of them booked during weekends Vanessa supposedly spent helping me. My stomach tightened harder with every date. This one was during my cataract appointment, I whispered. She told Daniel she stayed overnight because I was nervous to drive afterward. Daniel nodded once without speaking. Another charge appeared from a luxury rooftop. Restaurant in Chicago. Then spa bookings in Napa Valley. Airline lounge access. Private car services. It was all there hidden inside ordinary financial statements no one had questioned because married people are not supposed to investigate each other like strangers. She covered her tracks well, Daniel murmured. Most of the charges were split across different cards. He rubbed his jaw tiredly. But Marcus Hale kept showing up in companion records. I looked over at him carefully. Can airlines really track that? Pilots notice patterns, he replied quietly. Especially when you spend your life traveling. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Same routes. Same weekends. Same passenger. He paused for a moment before adding. And business class upgrades do not happen accidentally that often. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller to me. The air heavier. I stood up slowly and carried our untouched plates to the sink because I needed something normal to do with my hands. Outside, the Arizona heat shimmered above the backyard tiles. A hummingbird hovered briefly near one of the flowers Richard planted years ago before darting away again. Life continued moving so casually outside my windows while inside my house an entire marriage quietly unraveled. Mom, Daniel said softly behind me. I turned around. He looked exhausted now. Not angry, just deeply tired. Did you ever think something fell off with her? The question hurt more than I expected because the honest answer was yes. There had been moments. Tiny moments I buried immediately because I loved her and because I trusted my son's happiness more than my own instincts. Sometimes, I admitted quietly, but nothing clear enough to accuse someone over. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for several seconds. Tell me. I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel while memories surfaced one by one. There were little things. I began carefully, like how she always needed pictures whenever she visited. Daniel nodded faintly as though he already knew where this was going. And she never stayed long enough to really spend time together. She just created the appearance of it. I swallowed hard. Sometimes I would ask if she wanted dinner, and she would suddenly remember another appointment. Another memory surfaced painfully clear now. Last Christmas, she posted a picture online saying she spent Christmas Eve with me watching old movies. I looked toward Daniel helplessly, but she left after 20 minutes. His expression darkened slightly. I remember that post. People commented about what a wonderful daughter-in-law she was. My voice sounded smaller now. I was proud of her. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally he asked the question I think he had been avoiding all afternoon. Do you think she ever loved me? I felt my chest ache immediately, because there is no good answer when your child asks something like that. I walked back to the table and sat beside him instead of across from him this time. I think people can love someone and still betray them, I said softly. But I also think some people love being admired more than they love the person beside them. Daniel stared down at his wedding ring. She always cared about appearances. Yes, I admitted quietly. But I thought that was just social media culture. He gave a weak, humorless laugh. Apparently, it was a full-time job. The late afternoon sun had started turning golden by then, casting long shadows across the kitchen walls. Daniel finally closed the laptop and rubbed both hands over his face again. There is something else, he said after a pause. My stomach tightened instantly. What? He hesitated for the first time all day. I think Marcus Hale is married too. I stared at him. What? Daniel nodded slowly. I recognized the last name from somewhere and finally remembered this morning. He opened his phone again and pulled up a business article online. A smiling silver-haired man stood beside a younger blonde woman at some corporate charity event. He owns a luxury development company out of Denver. I looked closer at the woman beside Marcus and immediately noticed the wedding ring on her hand. Oh dear God, I whispered. Daniel locked the phone again and set it face down on the table. This was not some random mistake, Mom. His voice became very quiet now. This has been going on for a long time. He looked around the kitchen slowly before his eyes settled on me again. And somehow the entire thing was happening while she kept telling everyone she was taking care of you. The words hit harder than I expected because suddenly I realized what hurt me most was not even the affair itself. It was the fact that my loneliness had apparently become useful to someone else. Vanessa came to my house 2 days later carrying lemon muffins from the bakery she always bought from on Sundays. The moment I opened the front door and saw her standing there smiling softly in white linen pants and oversized sunglasses, I felt something inside me shift permanently. For years, I had looked at this woman and seen family. Now all I saw was performance. Evelyn, she said warmly as she stepped forward to hug me. I have been worried about you. Her perfume smelled light and expensive, something floral with vanilla underneath. I stood still for half a second too long before returning the embrace. That is kind of you, I replied quietly. Vanessa pulled back and studied my face carefully, almost as if she were checking whether I knew something. But if she felt nervous, she hid it well. I brought your favorite lemon muffins, she said brightly, lifting the bakery box slightly. And I thought maybe we could have lunch together. I stepped aside to let her in. Outside, Arizona sunlight flooded the driveway so brightly it almost hurt my eyes. Inside my house, the air felt cool and unnaturally still. Vanessa walked into the kitchen like she had done dozens of times before, setting the bakery box neatly on the counter before removing her sunglasses. Her blonde hair fell perfectly around her shoulders. Her wedding ring still glittered beneath the kitchen lights. How have you been feeling? She asked while opening cabinets for plates without even needing to ask where anything was. Daniel said you seem tired lately. The lie slipped out so naturally, I almost admired it. Daniel had not spoken to her in nearly 48 hours except through a short text saying he needed space. Yet here she was calmly building another version of reality as if habit had taken over. I am all right, I answered carefully while preparing coffee. Just moving slower these days. Vanessa gave me a sympathetic smile. You need to let people help you more. I nearly laughed at the irony of that sentence. Instead, I placed 2 mugs on the counter and kept my expression neutral. How was your trip? I asked quietly. For the first time, a flicker crossed her face. Tiny, almost invisible, but it was there. Trip, she repeated smoothly. I looked down as though distracted by the coffee pot. I thought you were traveling. She recovered immediately. Oh, no. A soft laugh followed. Just running around with charity events and meetings. Charity events. Meetings. The words sounded polished now. Rehearsed. I carried our mugs to the table while Vanessa arranged the muffins neatly onto plates like nothing in the world was wrong. Sunlight streamed across the kitchen floor exactly the same way it had 2 days earlier, while Daniel sat there silently uncovering the truth piece by piece. The normalness of everything felt unbearable. Vanessa finally sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. I have been worried about Daniel too, she said carefully. He has seemed distant lately. There it was. Fishing. Testing the water. I lifted my cup slowly. Flying takes a toll on people. Vanessa nodded sadly. I keep telling him he needs more time at home. Her eyes met mine then, searching for something. Marriage gets difficult when people grow apart. I stared at her for several seconds before answering. Yes, I said softly. I suppose it does. A strange silence settled between us after that. Not hostile, just heavy. Vanessa looked around the kitchen as though she suddenly felt uncomfortable in the quiet. You know, she said after a moment, sometimes I think Daniel forgets how much pressure there is on me too. I said nothing. People always assume pilots have glamorous lives, she continued with a small tired smile. But wives get lonely. There was something almost fascinating about watching her build excuses in real time. Layer after layer. Loneliness. Distance. Misunderstood marriage. She was preparing emotional shelter before the storm even arrived. I wondered how long she had been doing that without anyone noticing. Loneliness can make people do strange things, I said carefully. Vanessa looked up immediately. Our eyes locked for one long, uncomfortable second. Then she smiled again, but this time it looked forced around the edges. Exactly, she said softly. I felt suddenly exhausted. Not angry, just deeply tired in the way older people become tired after disappointment settles into their bones. I looked across the table at the woman I once defended endlessly to my friends. The woman I proudly called my daughter. And all I could think about was how many evenings I had spent alone in this house, while she told the world she was taking care of me. Vanessa reached into her purse then and pulled out her phone. Oh, she said lightly. Before I forget, let us take a quick picture together. Daniel loves seeing us spend time together. My chest tightened so sharply it almost took my breath away. There it was again. The performance. Even now. Even after everything. She stood beside my chair holding the phone upward with practiced ease while sunlight hit her perfectly from the kitchen window. Smile, she said sweetly. I looked directly into the camera. For the first time in years, I did not smile back. After Vanessa left that afternoon, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the untouched muffin still resting on the plate in front of me. The house felt unnaturally quiet again, but this time the silence carried something sharper beneath it. Awareness. Once you finally see deception clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it. Every memory changes shape. Every conversation sounds different inside your head. The sunlight had started fading from bright gold into the softer orange tones of evening, and still I sat there replaying Vanessa's smile over and over in my mind. Not because it looked cruel. That was the frightening part. It still looked warm, caring, gentle. I think truly dangerous people rarely look dangerous at all. Around 6 o'clock, Daniel arrived again. This time he was not wearing his pilot uniform. Just jeans, a gray t-shirt, and the exhausted expression of someone carrying too much disappointment too quietly. He let himself into the house with his old key and paused when he saw me still sitting at the table. You okay, Mom? He asked softly. I nodded once. She was here today. His entire body went still. Vanessa? She brought muffins. A hollow little laugh escaped me before I could stop it, and wanted another photograph together. Daniel closed his eyes briefly and lowered his head. He looked more tired every day this situation continued. Did she say anything suspicious? Not directly. I folded my hands together slowly. But she kept talking about loneliness, marriage struggles, pressure. Daniel walked toward the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water before leaning against the counter. She is preparing defenses already. I looked up at him carefully. Do you think she knows you have proof? He twisted the bottle cap slowly between his fingers. I do not know. Then after a pause he added quietly, but I think she knows I stopped believing her. He took a long drink of water before setting the bottle down beside the sink. I spent most of today talking to someone from corporate security. My chest tightened instantly. Security? Relax, he said gently. Nothing official. He ran a tired hand through his hair. One of my closest friends works in internal operations. I asked him to quietly help me verify some travel records. I watched him carefully while he crossed the kitchen and sat beside me again. And for several seconds he did not answer. Instead, he opened a manila folder and slowly spread several printed documents across the table between us. Passenger manifests, flight itineraries, lounge access records, hotel check-in timestamps. My eyes moved over the pages while my stomach slowly dropped lower with every line. 11 flights, Daniel said quietly. Over the last 8 months. I looked up at him immediately. 11? He nodded once. Different cities. Same companion. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the strain underneath every word now. Marcus Hale traveled with her almost every time she claimed she was spending weekends here with you. I stared down. At the papers again. Phoenix to Denver. Dallas to Seattle. Miami to San Francisco. So many trips. So many lies hidden beneath ordinary weekends and cheerful social media captions. There is more, Daniel said carefully. He slid another page toward me. Private hotel suite charges. Wine service. Luxury transportation. My face flushed immediately, and I looked away because even though nothing explicit appeared on the page, the intimacy behind it felt impossible to ignore. Daniel noticed my discomfort and quietly stacked the papers back together. I am sorry, Mom. No, I whispered. Do not apologize. I folded my hands tightly together to stop their trembling. You deserve the truth. The room grew silent again except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Finally, I asked the question that had quietly haunted me all afternoon. What are you going to do? Daniel leaned back in the chair and stared toward the darkening kitchen window. I do not know yet. His voice sounded hollow now. Part of me wants to confront her immediately. He swallowed hard. Another part of me keeps hoping there is some explanation that makes this less humiliating. I felt my heart ache for him because humiliation was exactly the right word. Not just betrayal. Humiliation. The kind that quietly strips dignity away piece by piece while other people continue smiling beside you. Daniel, I said softly, none of this is your fault. He gave me a tired smile that did not quite reach his eyes. You know what hurts the most? I shook my head slowly. He looked down at the folder again. It is not even Marcus. His jaw tightened slightly. It is the fact that she used you. My chest tightened immediately. Honey, no, Mom. He interrupted gently but firmly. She knew exactly what she was doing. His eyes finally met mine again. She knew people would never question a woman visiting her elderly mother-in-law. Silence settled heavily between us after that, because deep down I knew he was right. Vanessa had studied perception carefully. She understood appearances, sympathy, optics. She knew lonely older women made perfect cover stories because no one ever looked closely at them. We become invisible. Eventually, harmless. Background scenery in other people's lives. I looked around my quiet kitchen again. The framed family photos. The crocheted placemats. Richard's old coffee mug still hanging beside the stove after all these years. My loneliness had not embarrassed Vanessa. It had benefited her. Daniel suddenly reached into the folder again and pulled out one final sheet of paper. There is something else I found today, he said quietly. I looked down at the document and immediately recognized a familiar location printed at the top. The Marriott Resort in Sedona. My stomach turned cold instantly because I remembered that weekend clearly. Vanessa had told everyone she stayed at my house because I had the flu. Daniel looked at me steadily across the table. Mom, he said softly. That was the weekend Richard's birthday came around. And suddenly I remembered sitting alone in this very kitchen eating soup by myself while texting Vanessa, thank you for being so thoughtful. The next week passed with a strange kind of quiet tension hanging over everything. Daniel did not confront Vanessa. He did not accuse her. He did not even raise his voice during the few brief conversations they still had inside their house. That almost seemed to disturb Vanessa more than anger would have. She kept trying to pull him back into normal routines, texting him cheerful little updates, asking whether he wanted salmon or steak for dinner, sending photos of grocery store flowers beside captions like thinking of you. But Daniel had stopped reacting emotionally, and once someone stops reacting, manipulative people often become uneasy. I noticed it immediately the following Thursday evening when Vanessa invited herself over to my house again. This time she arrived carrying takeout containers from my favorite Italian restaurant downtown. I thought we could have a girls' night, she said brightly while stepping inside. Daniel is flying overnight anyway. I forced a small smile and let her in. Outside, the Arizona sky was turning soft pink beneath the setting sun, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Inside my kitchen, Vanessa moved around with her usual polished confidence, unpacking pasta containers and garlic bread onto plates as though we were simply family enjoying another ordinary evening together. But now I watched her differently. Every movement looked studied, every smile carefully timed. You look tired, she said while pouring sparkling water into glasses. Are you sleeping all right? Not particularly, I admitted truthfully. Vanessa gave me a sympathetic look. I worry about you being alone so much. The sentence settled heavily between us, because now I knew she had probably spoken those same words to dozens of people while secretly using my loneliness as cover for her own double life. That is sweet of you, I replied quietly. We ate dinner at the kitchen table while soft jazz music played from the small speaker near the window. Vanessa chatted casually about charity events and home renovations and someone's upcoming baby shower. Normal conversation. Safe conversation. But underneath it, I could feel something restless in her tonight. Her eyes kept flicking toward me as though searching for cracks in the surface. Finally, she set down her fork carefully. Has Daniel talked to you much lately? There it was. I dabbed my napkin slowly against my mouth before answering. Some. He has been distant. Her voice sounded carefully wounded now. I do not know what happened after Denver. I kept my expression calm. Flying can be stressful. Vanessa studied my face for several long seconds. Do you think he is unhappy with me? The question floated quietly between us while the jazz music continued softly in the background. I looked at her sitting there in cream-colored cashmere with perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a wine glass, and suddenly I realized something important. Vanessa was not nervous because she felt guilty. She was nervous because she felt uncertainty. She could no longer fully control the narrative. Marriage changes people over time, I said carefully. Sometimes we stop seeing what is directly in front of us. For the first time all evening, her smile faltered slightly. What does that mean? She asked softly. I met her eyes calmly across the table. Exactly what I said. Silence settled between us. Then, not explosive silence, just cold silence. The kind older women learn to use when they have finally grown tired of pretending everything is all right. Vanessa looked away first. A few minutes later, her phone lit up beside her wine glass. She grabbed it almost immediately, but not before I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Marcus. My chest tightened, though I kept my expression perfectly neutral. Vanessa typed quickly beneath the table before forcing another small smile toward me. Sorry, she said lightly. One of the charity board members keeps asking questions about an event next month. I nodded once. Of course. But something had shifted now. The performance no longer flowed naturally. Tiny cracks were appearing. She became quieter after that. Distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. Around 8:30 she finally stood and gathered her purse. I should probably head home, she said. Early morning tomorrow. I walked her toward the front door slowly. Just before leaving, she turned toward me with an expression that almost looked vulnerable. Evelyn, she said softly. You know I love this family, right? The question surprised me enough that for a second I could not answer. Then I looked at her carefully beneath the porch light. Her face still beautiful, still composed. But now I could see exhaustion beginning to creep beneath the surface. Fear too. I think, I said quietly. People sometimes love what a family gives them more than the family itself. Vanessa stared at me for a long moment. Something unreadable flickered through her eyes. Then she smiled again, though this time it looked painfully thin around the edges. Good night, she whispered. Good night, Vanessa. I watched her drive away beneath the dark Arizona sky before closing the front door softly behind me. The house fell silent again except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Dinner tomorrow night. Both of you. 7 o'clock. I stared at the message for several seconds before replying. Is everything all right? 3 dots appeared immediately, then vanished. Finally, another message arrived. No, Mom. But it will. B. Friday evening arrived warm and unusually still, the kind of Arizona night where the air seems frozen in place even after sunset. I stood in my bedroom staring at my reflection longer than usual before leaving for dinner. At 68 years old, I no longer spent much time worrying about appearance, but tonight felt different somehow. Important. I chose a navy blue blouse Richard always liked because it made my eyes look brighter, brushed my silver hair carefully, and put on the pearl earrings Daniel bought me after his first year as a pilot. Small armor for a difficult evening. Daniel had chosen a quiet upscale restaurant in North Scottsdale overlooking the desert hills. Soft lighting, dark wood interiors, expensive wine lists. The kind of place people visit when they want conversations to remain private. When I arrived a few minutes early, I spotted him immediately sitting alone at a corner table near the windows. He stood as soon as he saw me and kissed my cheek gently before helping me into my chair. You look beautiful, Mom, he said softly. I smiled faintly. You look tired. He gave a small humorless laugh. That too. There was something different about him tonight. Not anger. Not sadness either. Just clarity. Like someone who had finally stopped fighting reality and decided to face it directly. Is Vanessa here yet? I asked quietly. Daniel glanced toward the entrance. Not yet. He adjusted the cuff of his dark jacket slowly before adding, Marcus Hale is coming too. My stomach dropped instantly. He agreed to come? Daniel nodded once. I invited him personally this morning. Does Vanessa know? No. He looked toward the window now, where desert lights shimmered softly against the dark horizon. I wanted the truth in one room for once. Before I could respond, I saw Vanessa entering the restaurant. She looked elegant as always, wearing a deep green dress that fell softly around her figure and the same gold bracelet Daniel gave her for their 10th anniversary. For one painful second, she looked exactly like the woman I used to proudly call my daughter. Then she spotted Daniel and smiled warmly, unaware that Marcus Hale had just walked through the entrance behind her. Everything changed the moment she turned around and saw him. The color drained from her face so quickly it almost frightened me. Marcus stopped walking too. Tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed, married. The tension between them became visible instantly, sharp enough to cut through the soft restaurant music surrounding us. Daniel remained seated calmly. Please, he said quietly. Sit down. Vanessa looked like she might speak, but no words came out. Marcus adjusted his suit jacket awkwardly before lowering himself into the empty chair across from Daniel. Vanessa sat beside him mechanically, still pale beneath the warm restaurant lighting. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. A waiter approached nervously with menus, clearly sensing something uncomfortable at the table. Daniel smiled politely and ordered a bottle of sparkling water. His composure unsettled me more than shouting ever could have. Once the waiter disappeared again, Daniel folded his hands calmly in front of him. I wanted everyone here because I am tired of confusion, he said quietly. Vanessa swallowed hard beside him. Daniel, no, his voice remained soft but firm. You have had months to explain things honestly. Silence settled heavily across the table. Nearby diners continued laughing softly over wine glasses, completely unaware that an entire marriage was quietly collapsing only a few feet away. Daniel finally reached into the leather folder beside him and slid several photographs onto the table. Airport security stills, hotel timestamps, passenger records. I watched Vanessa's hands begin trembling almost immediately. Marcus stared downward without speaking. 11 flights, Daniel said quietly. 8 months. No one moved. No one interrupted him. Do you know what I could not stop thinking about? Daniel continued after a moment. Not the lies themselves. His eyes shifted slowly toward Vanessa now. The fact that every single time you disappeared, you told people you were taking care of my mother. Vanessa finally found her voice then, though it sounded thin and shaky now. Daniel, please listen to me. I listened for 11 years. His tone never rose. I believed you for 11 years. Marcus suddenly stood from the table, visibly uncomfortable. I think I should go. Daniel looked up at him calmly. That would probably be best. Marcus nodded once without meeting anyone's eyes before leaving quickly through the restaurant dining room. Vanessa watched him disappear with visible panic spreading across her face now. And suddenly the entire performance finally collapsed. No polished smile. No elegant explanations. Just fear. Daniel looked exhausted more than angry. Was any of it real? He asked quietly. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears immediately. Of course it was. Then why use my mother? The question landed softly but heavily across the table. Vanessa looked toward me for the first time all evening. Evelyn, I never wanted to hurt you. I held her gaze steadily. No, I said quietly. You just needed me useful. Her expression crumpled completely then. Around us, silverware clinked softly against plates while the restaurant carried on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But at our table, something irreversible had finally ended. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment like a man exhausted after a very long flight. Then quietly, without anger or cruelty, he removed his wedding ring and placed it carefully beside his water glass. The drive home from the restaurant felt strangely peaceful. Not happy, not relieved, just quiet in the way the desert becomes quiet after a storm finally passes through. Daniel drove slowly through the Scottsdale streets while warm night air drifted through the slightly open windows. Neither of us spoke much at first. The city lights blurred softly against the darkness outside, while old jazz played low through the car speakers. I kept thinking about Vanessa's face at the restaurant after Marcus walked away. Not because I felt satisfaction. Surprisingly, I did not. Mostly I felt tired. Deeply tired in the way people feel after carrying confusion for too long without realizing how heavy it had become. Daniel finally broke the silence while waiting at a red light near Camelback Road. I think part of me knew for a while. His hand stayed steady on the steering wheel. I just did not want to look directly at it. I stared out the passenger window at the glowing restaurant signs and palm trees moving softly in the night breeze. Most people do not, I answered quietly, especially when love is involved. He nodded faintly. She always seemed so perfect from the outside. I looked over at my son carefully then. 38 years old. Successful pilot. Intelligent. Kind. The same little boy who used to cry when injured birds fell from trees during summer storms. People think betrayal only happens to weak men or foolish women. But the truth is kinder people often become easier to deceive because they expect honesty from others. You know what hurts the most now? Daniel asked softly. I shook my head. He swallowed hard before speaking again. I kept defending her. His voice cracked slightly for the first time all evening. Friends warn me sometimes. Co-workers hinted things looked strange. But I always defended her. I reached over and rested my hand gently on his arm. That says something good about you, I whispered. Not something bad. He gave me a tired smile before turning back toward the road. I still cannot believe she used you like that. The words settled heavily between us again because even now, after everything, that remained the deepest wound. Not the flights. Not the hotels. Not even Marcus Hale. It was the fact that my loneliness had apparently become useful camouflage for someone else's deception. When we reached my neighborhood, Daniel parked in the driveway, but did not turn off the engine immediately. Warm air drifted through the open windows, carrying the faint scent of desert flowers from somewhere nearby. What happens now? I asked carefully. Daniel stared through the windshield for several long seconds before answering. Tomorrow, I am meeting a lawyer. He finally turned off the car then and leaned back heavily in his seat. I cannot stay married to someone I do not recognize anymore. I nodded slowly because there was nothing else to say. Some endings arrive loudly with screaming and shattered plates. Others arrive quietly in dim restaurants beneath soft lighting while wedding rings rest forgotten beside untouched glasses of water. Daniel walked me to my front door like he always did. Before leaving, he hugged me tightly beneath the porch light. I am sorry, Mom, he whispered against my hair. For what? For not seeing how much she used your kindness. My chest tightened painfully. Honey, I said softly. Good people always assume others have good intentions too. He pulled back and looked at me carefully. Dad used to say that. I smiled faintly. Your father was usually right about people. Daniel laughed quietly for the first time in days. Then he kissed my forehead and headed back toward his car. I stood on the porch watching his taillights disappear into the warm Arizona night before stepping back inside my silent house. But tonight the silence felt different somehow. Less hollow. Less lonely. I moved slowly through the dark kitchen, turning on only the small light above the stove. Richard's old coffee mug still hung beside the cabinet exactly where he left it years ago. The framed family photos still lined the hallway walls. Some things had broken this week, but not everything. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and carried it onto the back patio where the desert air had finally cooled. Above me, the Arizona sky stretched endlessly black and clear, scattered with stars bright enough to make the world feel larger than pain for a little while. I sat there quietly thinking about age and invisibility and how easily older people become background scenery in younger lives. We are expected to stay polite, stay grateful, stay useful. And perhaps that was why Vanessa never imagined I would notice the truth hiding beneath all her careful performances. She saw loneliness when she looked at me. Emptiness. A quiet older widow sitting alone in Arizona. What she failed to understand was that people who survive long marriages, loss, illness, and grief become very skilled at recognizing absence. We notice when warmth disappears from a voice, when smiles stop reaching someone's eyes, when love slowly turns into convenience. My phone buzzed softly beside my teacup sometime after midnight. A text message from Vanessa. I stared at the screen for several seconds before opening it. I never wanted things to happen like this. Please tell Daniel I truly loved him. I read the message twice beneath the quiet desert sky. Then calmly, without anger, I locked the phone and set it face down on the patio table. Because for the first time in a very long while, I no longer felt responsible for carrying someone else's version of the truth.